They looked at your silence and mistook it for weakness. They studied your patience and called it hesitation. They believed they were facing the same version of you that everyone else had underestimated. That's the mistake people keep making. They never ask what battles shaped you before this moment. They never see the failures you buried, the fear you defeated, or the old version of yourself you left behind. By the time they realize they're not confronting someone ordinary, the illusion they've been relying on has already collapsed. The most dangerous opponent isn't the one with the loudest reputation. It's the one who has already survived every part of themselves that once stood in the way. Most people think strength is born in victory. They imagine powerful people have easy histories, perfect timing, and lives untouched by failure. They see confidence and assume it appeared overnight. They admire resilience without asking what had to be destroyed before that resilience could exist. That's the strange thing about real strength. It rarely announces where it came from. It quietly carries the scars while everyone else admires the armor. The person standing in front of the world today is almost never the same person who began the journey. Somewhere along the way, an older version had to disappear. The version that feared rejection. The version that chased approval from people who never intended to understand. The version that believed every setback was a final judgment instead of another lesson. Growth has never been about becoming someone completely new. It's about refusing to remain the person your fears created. Life has a remarkable way of forcing change without asking permission. One disappointment teaches caution. Another teaches patience. A betrayal teaches discernment. Failure teaches humility. Isolation teaches self-reliance. None of those lessons feel valuable while you're living through them. They feel unfair. They feel exhausting. They feel like punishment. Only later do you realize those difficult seasons were quietly building a foundation no comfort ever could. People often underestimate someone because they only see the finished result. They never witness the nights filled with doubt, the repeated failures, the moments when quitting looked more reasonable than continuing. They see composure without seeing the chaos that taught it. They see discipline without seeing the countless temptations that strengthened it. They see confidence without seeing the years spent questioning everything. The fascinating part is that your greatest battles are rarely fought against other people. They're fought against the voice inside your own mind, the one insisting you're not ready, the one reminding you of every mistake, the one trying to convince you that your past has already decided your future. Defeating that voice changes everything, because once you've stopped being controlled by your own fear, the opinions of strangers begin losing their power. That's why some people remain calm when pressure arrives. It isn't because they've avoided hardship. It's because hardship introduced them to themselves. They've already faced disappointment without surrendering. They've already stood back up after failure. They've already survived moments they once believed would break them. The next challenge may be difficult, but it isn't unfamiliar. It's almost amusing how quickly people judge what they don't understand. They mistake quietness for uncertainty, patience for weakness, and restraint for inability. They assume that because someone isn't seeking attention, they must have nothing worth noticing. What they fail to recognize is that the strongest foundations are built underground, long before anyone sees the structure rising above the surface. Your past was never meant to become a prison. It was meant to become a forge. Every setback removed something unnecessary. Every lesson strengthened something essential. Every version of yourself that couldn't survive the journey made room for someone wiser, calmer, and stronger, until one day the person staring back from the mirror became proof that the hardest battle was never against the world. It was against the limits you once believed about yourself. Silence has always been misunderstood. People assume that if someone isn't speaking, they aren't thinking. If they aren't reacting, they aren't capable. If they aren't demanding attention, they must have nothing worth noticing. It's a dangerous assumption because the loudest things in life are rarely the most powerful. Thunder announces itself. Lightning simply arrives. The world has trained people to worship noise. The loudest opinion wins the argument. The biggest performance earns the applause. The person constantly proving themselves is mistaken for the strongest. But real power has never needed constant advertisement. It doesn't introduce itself before entering the room. It doesn't ask for permission to exist. It simply waits, watches, and understands more than it reveals. Watch how people behave around someone quiet. They begin filling the silence with their own words. They explain too much. They brag too much. They reveal insecurities they never intended to expose. It's fascinating. Most people become uncomfortable when they can't predict what another person is thinking. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty forces hidden personalities into the open. The remarkable thing about quiet strength is that it doesn't waste energy. Every unnecessary reaction is avoided. Every pointless argument is ignored. Every insult isn't treated like an emergency demanding an immediate response. While others are busy defending their ego, the silent observer is collecting information. They notice patterns hidden beneath emotional outbursts. They recognize motives hidden behind carefully chosen words. They understand that people often reveal themselves, most clearly when they believe nobody is paying attention. That's why those who depend on manipulation dislike quiet people. Manipulation needs predictable reactions. It expects anger, guilt, fear, or desperation. A silent mind interrupts the process. It pauses before responding. It questions before believing. It observes before deciding. Those few seconds of patience can dismantle an entire strategy built on emotional impulse. People often confuse restraint with weakness because they've never experienced genuine self-control. Anyone can explode. Anyone can raise their voice. Anyone can allow emotions to dictate every decision. Remaining composed when chaos invites you to lose yourself requires a completely different kind of strength. It's invisible, which is exactly why it's so often underestimated. Think about the deepest rivers. They move with incredible force, yet their surface often appears calm. Compare that to shallow water, which creates endless noise over the smallest obstacles. Human character behaves much the same way. Those with little control often make the biggest display. Those with true depth rarely need to convince anyone of what they already know. The irony is impossible to ignore. The people most eager to prove they're powerful are usually searching for validation. The ones who genuinely possess inner strength no longer need strangers to confirm it. They understand that reputation can be manufactured, appearances can be rehearsed, and words can be borrowed, but quiet confidence cannot be faked for long. Eventually pressure arrives, performances collapse. And the silent person everyone overlooked quietly becomes the one nobody can ignore, because their strength was never built on attention in the first place. Fear has convinced more people to surrender than any opponent ever could. Before the battle begins, before a single obstacle appears, before reality even has the chance to speak, fear has already started whispering its version of the future. It tells you you're too late, too weak, too inexperienced. It paints defeat so vividly that many people never bother taking the first step. The strange part is that nothing has actually happened yet. They're running from possibilities their own minds created. Most people believe fear lives outside of them. They blame difficult circumstances, powerful enemies, harsh criticism, or uncertain outcomes. But fear rarely begins there. It starts in the quiet conversations you have with yourself when nobody is listening. Every repeated doubt becomes a habit. Every habit becomes a belief. Every belief quietly begins directing your choices until you mistake your own hesitation for reality. Watch what happens when someone truly conquers fear. They don't suddenly become fearless. They simply stop allowing fear to make decisions on their behalf. The heartbeat still races. The uncertainty still exists. The risk hasn't disappeared. The difference is that fear is no longer sitting behind the steering wheel. It has been moved to the passenger seat, where it can speak without controlling the direction. That's what most people misunderstand. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is refusing to negotiate with it. Fear will always present convincing arguments. It will remind you of every failure, every embarrassment, every painful memory stored in your mind. It will insist that staying still is the safest option. Safety has a curious way of becoming a prison when it's chosen often enough. The interesting thing about fear is how quickly it shrinks under observation. Ignore it, and it grows louder. Chase it away, and it returns stronger. But examine it honestly, and it begins losing its authority. You start asking uncomfortable questions. Is this danger real, or is it familiar? Am I protecting myself, or protecting my excuses? Has fear been warning me or controlling me? Those questions expose weaknesses fear desperately hopes you'll never notice. Manipulation depends on fear because frightened people become predictable. Convince someone they're powerless, and they'll stop trying. Convince them failure is permanent, and they'll stop learning. Convince them rejection defines their worth, and they'll begin rejecting themselves before anyone else has the opportunity. The strongest chains are never wrapped around the body. They're wrapped around belief. The remarkable part is that every meaningful transformation begins at the exact moment fear loses its position of authority. One decision interrupts years of hesitation. One act of courage challenges countless imaginary limits. One refusal to surrender changes the story entirely. Nothing outside has changed, yet everything inside has shifted. That's why the greatest victory has never been defeating another person. It has always been defeating the version of yourself that believed fear deserved the final word. Because once that battle is won, every challenge beyond it becomes something to face with clarity instead of surrender, determination instead of avoidance, and purpose instead of panic. People have always been fascinated by force. Bigger armies, louder voices, stronger fists. They assume power belongs to whoever can intimidate the most people or make the biggest display. It's an easy illusion to believe because force is visible. It demands attention. It creates noise. But history has a habit of reminding everyone that the greatest victories are often decided long before physical strength ever enters the room. The mind is where every battle truly begins. Before anyone takes action, a decision has already been made inside their thoughts. Confidence or hesitation, clarity or confusion, discipline or impulse. The body simply follows the instructions it receives. That's why two people with equal strength can produce completely different outcomes. One has already defeated themselves mentally, while the other has already accepted the possibility of victory. Think about how easily a powerful person can become powerless if doubt enters at the wrong moment. One uncertain thought interrupts years of preparation. One emotional reaction destroys months of careful planning. Physical ability means very little when panic takes control. The strongest hands become useless if the mind guiding them has already surrendered. That's why manipulation almost never targets your muscles. It targets your thinking. Convince someone they're incapable, and they'll stop trying. Convince them they're alone, and they'll stop asking for help. Convince them they're permanently defined by yesterday's mistakes, and they'll spend tomorrow proving those mistakes were right. The most efficient prison has never required locked doors. It only requires a mind willing to believe invisible limits. The remarkable thing about the mind is that it learns from repetition. Every repeated excuse becomes easier to believe. Every repeated act of discipline becomes easier to repeat again. Your thoughts are constantly training you, whether you realize it or not. Feed your mind distractions every day, and focus begins disappearing. Feed it courage through action, and confidence slowly becomes your natural response, instead of something you pretend to possess. People often confuse intelligence with mental strength. They're not the same thing. Intelligence collects information. Mental strength decides what to do when pressure arrives. A brilliant mind can collapse under fear, while an ordinary person with discipline can accomplish extraordinary things because They refuse to let emotions replace judgment. Notice how the calmest individual often influences the entire room. Everyone else reacts to circumstances. They respond with intention. While panic spreads through the crowd like wildfire, they quietly analyze what others overlook. They don't need to dominate every conversation because they've already mastered something far more valuable: the ability to remain clear when confusion is trying to become contagious. The irony is almost impossible to ignore. People spend years strengthening their appearance while neglecting the one place where every victory begins. They polish their image, chase approval, and build reputations, forgetting that a disciplined mind can overcome weaknesses the body cannot. While an undisciplined mind can waste strengths no amount of talent will ever compensate for, proving that the greatest force anyone can possess has never been physical power, but complete command over their own thinking. Storms never send invitations. They don't announce the exact moment they'll arrive or ask whether you're prepared. One day the sky is quiet, and the next everything familiar begins shaking. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid those moments, believing peace comes from escaping difficulty. But the strongest people are not the ones who never face storms. They're the ones who become something the storm can no longer destroy. The world has an interesting habit of underestimating quiet transformation. While everyone is watching loud victories and public success, real change happens in places nobody notices. It happens during the lonely mornings, when discipline defeats comfort. It happens after failure, when choosing to stand again feels almost unreasonable. It happens in silence, where no applause exists to reward persistence. Those invisible moments shape a person more than any spotlight ever could. People often expect danger to arrive wearing an obvious face. They imagine strength announces itself with confidence and dramatic speeches. Reality is much stranger. The greatest force usually appears ordinary until pressure reveals what has been developing beneath the surface all along. Just as a seed carries the potential of a forest long before anyone sees a single branch, quiet resilience carries extraordinary power long before the world recognizes it. That's why so many people are surprised by unexpected greatness. They judged what they could see and ignored everything they couldn't. They measured someone's current circumstances instead of their capacity to adapt. They mistook patience for weakness, humility for insecurity, and silence for surrender. It's remarkable how often appearances encourage the wrong conclusions. The fascinating thing about becoming the storm is that it has nothing to do with creating chaos. It means becoming so mentally disciplined that chaos loses its ability to control you. While others panic, you observe. While others seek someone to blame, you seek understanding. While others become prisoners of emotion, you become the person capable of making decisions with clarity. The storm isn't outside anymore. It's the unstoppable force of conviction, resilience, and purpose moving through every obstacle without asking for permission. People spend years waiting for the perfect opportunity to prove themselves. They imagine one dramatic moment where the world finally notices their potential. But greatness is rarely revealed in a single instant. It's uncovered through thousands of unnoticed decisions that slowly reshape character. Every disciplined action strengthens the foundation until one day what looked impossible to everyone else becomes completely natural to you. The irony is almost poetic. Those who laugh at quiet preparation are often the first to fear its results. They celebrate visible talent while ignoring invisible consistency. They admire outcomes without respecting the process that created them. By the time they recognize what has been happening, the transformation is already complete. You don't become unstoppable because the world suddenly becomes easier. You become unstoppable because every hardship teaches you something comfort never could. Every setback sharpens your resolve instead of breaking it. And every challenge strips away another layer of weakness until the person who finally emerges is no longer waiting for the storm to pass, because they have become the force the storm itself can no longer overcome.